Hello and welcome to the latest episode of GAIN's Interview Cruncher. I'm Shuli Ghosh. I'm delighted to be hosting this session as part of GAIN's new series on climate change and nutrition, why they need each other. From plant growth to crop yields, it's clear that our food security is being challenged on multiple fronts. High temperatures, drought, flooding, they're all taking their toll. Today, we're going to be hearing from two of the world's leading scientists on how climate change threatens nutrition and food security and try to answer some of the most pressing questions about the expected crisis. So how does climate change affect our ability to produce the food needed to feed a growing population? How does it impact on the nutritional value of food? And what does it mean for those people who are already struggling to eat a sufficient and healthy diet? We'll be drawing on the latest scientific evidence to lay out the most impactful actions we can take to respond to the changes which are coming, as well as reducing the emissions from our food systems. We've also got the COP27 climate conference coming up in November. So we'll be asking what actions and what commitments we need to see from governments around the world. What kind of solutions can be implemented? And we'll also be reflecting on GAIN's work to ask what we and other actors can do to respond to the growing threat of climate change. Mario Herrero, a professor of sustainable food systems and global change in the Department of Global Development at Cornell University. He's also a Cornell Atkinson Scholar and a Nancy and Peter Meinig family investigator in the life sciences. He has over 25 years of research and development experience, and he's a newly appointed GAIN board member. What can we do then to adapt to the effects of climate change on nutrition and food systems, and also try and reduce greenhouse gas production from food systems themselves?
Thanks a lot for the question. I think it's a great, Cynthia gave a great presentation that will now open the Pandora's box. I'll try to give you some of the pointers on the kinds of things that we could do and the kinds of things that GAIN can do or that is already involved. A key point I want to make in this debate is that, you know, we need global concerted action. Look, for example, the recent crisis in Europe. There hasn't been anybody, any continent that has put more effort into, say, reducing emissions than Europe. Yet they are now feeling the brunt of full climate change, and with the the heat wave that they've had and other things. So this really shows that, you know, every single region needs to do exactly the same. And as Cynthia mentioned, you know, look, this is from The Guardian of today, the faults in Europe crop production. And you know, this is just in Europe. Now imagine what happens in low and middle income countries. It's scary. And why? Because these are the countries that will have really very low capacity for adapting. They are way more vulnerable than Europe, the US, all the OECD countries, which can throw money at the problem. But that's not the case in Africa. Apart from that, we get this completely different manifestation of the climate change impacts that really becomes is changing the way we have to adapt. We tend to think a lot about droughts and, you know, everything getting drier and so on. But the reality is that, you know, we're talking about droughts, flood, climate variability. We're talking about these things happening at the same time in different seasons in the same parts of the world. So it's a really tricky problem to actually solve. And this is what happens on terrestrial ecosystems and so on. But in reality, it's also beyond farming systems. And here's where I want to actually show this diagram of the food system. The food system, climate change will have impacts on the whole of the food system. we tend to focus on the food supply chains and food production, but in reality, with heat waves, with floods, etc., we are actually having significant impacts on food storage and loss, food processing and packaging, retails. We're getting into a lot more food waste. We're disrupting supply chains. We are destroying food environments, especially those very important informal ones that are critical for the poor. And this is actually affecting how we consume and utilize food and the stability of supply and consumption. So this is a systemic problem. It's not just what happens in the individual farms of producers, but this affects consumers and a range of other actors in the system. And here's where GAIN plays a really important role, because GAIN are really being very instrumental in dealing with all the aspects that go beyond food production and so on. I just want to mention livestock, because livestock are very much at the center of many of these debates. And on one hand, we tend to focus on the mitigation aspects and the greenhouse gas emissions of livestock. But at the same time, there are significant losses of production occurring now as a response of these heat waves. A recent paper that we did led by my colleague Philip Thornton estimated losses of $40 billion per year, or about 10% of the value of production of livestock being wiped out just because of these heat waves, with the biggest effects occurring in low and middle income countries. This is significant for the poor, for which livestock is a critical asset and a source of nutrients. So let's move a little bit and talk about emissions. Cynthia and I participated in the IPCC special report on climate change and land, and I think that in that report, we estimated that the food system was responsible for between 21 and 37% of anthropogenic emissions. Recently, a group of colleagues from FAO, from the JRC Center, and I think that Cynthia was also part of this effort as well, really looked at, well, where are these emissions coming from? And it's clearly a land-based issue. Land is really important. How we produce, how we consume food, the demand for food plays an enormous part in controlling the land use patterns that we utilize for the production of food. So there are differences between industrialized and developing countries, primarily in the energy emissions, with industrialized countries with more formal markets needing more refrigeration, more processing, etc. So that component is a little bit higher. But the reality is that it's really about land use and production when we're dealing with emissions. And there are many ways in which we could actually change production patterns, make them more efficient, make them more diverse, and so on. Then comes the other side of things. We've been talking about the supply of food, but the demand is also important. And what we eat matters a lot for health, nutrition, and also for greenhouse gas mitigation. This is a slide coming from the Eat Lancet Commission from the study on healthy diets from sustainable food system. And if you take here the 100% line, which is basically the Eat Lancet recommended diet, you can see at the top that there's considerable variation in over and under consumption of red meat, starchy vegetables, eggs, and poultry, basically the animal products and some of the starchy vegetables. In some places, we need to increase consumption of these. And in other places, we need to actually try to moderate consumption and perhaps reduce it. But on the other side of this graph, towards the bottom, we find that we're not eating enough of many of the things in all the regions. And this goes from vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, and nuts. Super nutritious, super protective, and also bearing the brunt of climate change impacts in many ways. But GAIN are very much about providing, trying to increase markets, trying to increase, incentivize the production of these elements of the diet as well. We need to do much better at increasing the supply and really providing incentives for meeting the demand for these products, which we know probably less about climate change impacts. So this is actually a clear researchable issue for the future, and we at ACMIP are very interested in delving in this space in the near future. It's certainly the next big missing link that we need to tackle, and it's essential for really getting more nutrition into the climate change impacts, apart from the ones that Cynthia mentioned on the reductions or changes in micronutrients. We know that there's plenty of things to do. And, this is, again, work that we did as part of the special report on climate change and land. And what you see here is different, different classes or types of options. And many of them have dual benefits of mitigation and adaptation. So we want the options that have these double whammies, because it's really important, and it's a lot more efficient for farmers to be able to do this. From the perspective of the whole value chain, here you see towards the bottom aspects related to improved food supply chains and also demand management. I think that from a GAIN's perspective, this is less of an agronomic kind of suite of options, and GAIN are already involved in many of these, food storage infrastructure, shortening supply chains, improving food transport and distribution, working on the food environments, food losses, promoting urban and peri-urban agriculture. And it's these kinds of things that can really make a difference, and that can make a difference in low and middle income countries. And many of these will have very important effects also on the mitigation component. We are not about silver bullets. That's another really important thing to measure. This is about packages. How do we intelligently come with a mix and match of these different options for different environments, different countries, and so on? And the same happens on the policy side. This is my last slide, but we also did in the special report on climate change and land an inventory of what could happen on policy measures, and they come all the way from how are we going to deal with the supply side, but also many of those are about raising profitability and modifying demand, like funding for reduced food waste, all the awareness campaigns, the educations, the current discussion around changing subsidies, implementing new standards and food labeling and so on, that will become extremely important ancillary measures so that the other adaptation options improve. I try to be really positive, and I think that, human ingenuity has won through centuries. And I really think that with good science and solid and improvements in institutions, and we're going to actually be able to make inroads into tackling this problem, especially for the poor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. And it's good to hear that you're positive and that you're an optimist. And I think it's clear that there are actions that can be taken from what you've said. I think the question is timing, what kind of time crunch we're on, and also the point you make about many low income countries are going to struggle to put in place some of those measures. If you want to find out more about the work that GAIN is doing, latest news and events, and a replay of this, then just go to the website gainhealth.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We're at GAIN Alliance. Thank you very much, and I hope you join us again next time.